The Bridge is a Christian agency that cares for those hurting in the inner city of Saskatoon. Over the years, many people from Lakeview have supported their work. Join us today for a pancake breakfast after both services hosted by The Bridge. All proceeds raised will go directly towards their work.
Lakeview kids are joining God in the renewal of all things. Each year we pick a project, either globally or locally, to teach kids about servanthood and to think about others, especially around Christmas time. We ask the kids to do jobs or chores and bring the money that they earn back to Lakeview Church. And this year they brought $500 back for the Bridge. So we'd like to thank all the friends and family who supported the kids in this experience. Great job, guys.
This is your last day to sign up for Easter Day baptism. Class in preparation for taking the plunge is this Thursday from 7 to 9 p.m. To inquire or sign up, visit me, Allison, here at the newsstand.
As a staff, we have been having conversations about how to recruit volunteers in the church. We're looking to change the process in the fall, but right now we are in need of volunteers in the kids ministry and for ushers. The kids ministry, it's more than just serving crackers and juice. This is the spiritual formation of our children. It's vital, important work for us as a community. Ushers, it's more than just passing around a collection plate. They are a vital part of our Sunday morning services. So, if you think you can volunteer in the kids ministry or as an usher, come visit us at the newsstand. Every year, we return to the same images. Every year, we revisit the same songs. Every year, we retell the same stories. Why? Because it's so easy to forget, so we need to be reminded. Good Friday calls us to both mourn and celebrate the death of Jesus. Easter Sunday calls us to embrace the resurrection both now and in the life to come. Plan to be a part of Good Friday for a 1-hour experiential gathering beginning at 10 a.m. And then on Easter Sunday, 2 services packed with music, baptisms, and really annoying noisemakers for kids of all ages. Join in. So that's it for this week. For more information, visit the newsstand or find us online at lakeviewchurch.com.
So, it's that time of year where my thoughts are turning to spring and to summer. I mean, the weather right now really is helping. I'm guessing we're 4 or 5 weeks ahead of spring melt. It's quite amazing. And in my life and in my home, this is the time of year where I start to think about summer holidays. And for the quarter century or so that Darlene and I have been together and we've had a family, that means going on a summer camping trip with the kids. I don't know if you do that kind of thing, but we were that family with the big yellow station wagon, the wood paneling, 1979 custom cruiser classic Oldsmobile. And we would load it up to the gills and put our bikes on top, and we would head west to the Rockies, or sometimes we'd head east to Manitoba, where Darlene's family is. And we would have all kinds of great family times. There'd be the cousins and the campfire, there'd be sun and sand, and we try and do something a bit different each year. But the way it ended was always the same. And it's something that I really enjoyed, and maybe you've had that same kind of experience. So you've gone somewhere, but you've got to come back. And so there is that experience, and for us it was usually that long last day. You put on all the miles, and that last day is you're coming home. And so the kids and all the stuff is loaded up, and you're driving and driving and driving, and the day gets to evening, and it gets to night, and Darlene's asleep, and all the kids are asleep, and finally I see the city lights in the distance, and then we drive up, and we're getting close. And then take the turn off of the highway, and we get onto Circle Drive, and so I'm going to go north, and I'm going to turn off on Avenue C, and I'm going past familiar signs, and it's starting to feel like I'm where I belong again. And we turn onto 51st, and we go past those familiar landmarks. There's the green roof of BJM, and then we keep going a bit further, and there's Marion Graham. And then we turn right and go down the hill. Well, in Saskatoon, I can call it a hill, but when my family from BC, I told them, just go down the hill past the elementary school. They said, what hill? There's no hill here. But we're going down, and make that last turn left onto Candle Crescent, and then we see our spruce tree, and I see the lights of our house, and I know that everything's going to be okay, that we're home. retracing the steps that we passed by on our way out of the city a week or 2 weeks previous, and now we come back and landmark, by familiar sight, we're back home. We can sleep well, and it's okay. It's that experience of coming home is what we've got in these final chapters of the book of Revelation. This is the map that says we are here. Because what we've got here is pretty much an exact match to where the Bible starts out, where the story, our human story, starts out. If we think about what are the key images, the anchoring symbols, chapter by chapter by chapter, that we've been walking through and that we will walk through today and then next week, we're coming home. What do I mean? Well, 2 weeks ago, we were looking at Babylon, that horrible city. Well, that's Babel. That's Babel. That's the city of human pride and rebellion. And then we go a little bit further and we walk past and we see the serpent, that ancient dragon, and we see him destroyed. And today we're going to meet the bride. We're going to meet the bride. And next week, the climax comes in the garden with the tree of life. So if you think of how Genesis starts out, Genesis, the story that starts with God creation in chapter 2, after the prelude of chapter 1, we've got God making a garden, and then he makes the man and he gives the man a bride. And then we've got the snake that brings death into the world. And then we've got the city that's built. So you see how we're walking backwards now. And these letters are maybe so big that we don't recognize the message. We might just stumble right into it. But the message is this. As we read the last chapters of Revelation, we are coming home. This is where we belong. The poet T.S. Eliot captured the essence of this sense of coming home in the conclusion of one of his famous poems. We shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. To come back to where we started. There's something good and satisfying and wholesome about this, coming home. And all shall be well, and all manner of thing shall be well. The end of the book of Revelation is about the return to Eden, the return to that place where we started, that place where we belong, where we were created to be fully human, fully alive, fully immersed in a world handmade by love. We are coming home. And so there is lots of symbolism in this chapter, as we've seen throughout the book of Revelation. And I hope you're starting to get the hang of that you're feeling comfortable with that, seeing how these images, these pictures that surround us on every side as we read Revelation, that they engage our imagination, that they wake us up to the deeper truths that God has for us. It is a foreign world, I recognize. It's shaped by the landscape of the Scriptures, which is different than 2016. Different from, it's shaped by the Bible's stories and poems, its prayers and prophecies. But all the images that we're going to see this morning point in this one direction, that we are coming home. There's an old song that maybe some of you will remember. We're marching to Zion, beautiful, beautiful Zion. We're marching upward to Zion, the beautiful city of God. That's one way of talking about it. There's another old writer, and he was actually a well-known sparring partner with T.S. Eliot. He describes it as the adventure of returning to the heart of reality, further up and further in. Come home, come further up and further in to this, the heart of reality. And just as an aside, if you've got kids or if you like to read kids' literature, one of the best and easiest commentaries in the book of Revelation is a story called The Last Battle by this author, C.S. Lewis. So it's a kid's bedtime story, and it's a commentary on the book of Revelation. So, I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth were gone, and the sea didn't exist anymore. This takes us right back to Genesis 1, verse 1. I hope you can hear that. And this verse and its message is so important. There is a whole sermon right here, and I'll leave that for Joe to pick up another time. But why do I say that this verse is so important? It's an anchor. It's an anchor for our faith and for our hope. The anchor is a new heaven and a new earth together. Because too much of our contemporary Christianity, too much of our own faith, I think, divorces these two realities. That says that our faith is all about something up in the sky. It's about something that's immaterial in us, our soul or our spirit, going to heaven when we die. Now, that much is true. I believe it. The Bible says it. But at the same time, there is so much more about what it means to follow Jesus, both in this life and in the life to come. If we think that our faith is simply escaping as a ghost, as a spirit from this world, that we're somehow disembodied, and that really is what we're looking forward to, that is a disembodied, that is a gutless faith that is ultimately disconnected from this gritty and real world that we live in. So following Jesus means that everything that God has made, this incredibly complex interplay, this mix of physical and social and emotional and spiritual realities, that all of this is the arena in which we discover and experience God and in which we serve God. It's about all of life, all of creation, heaven and earth together being part of God's plan, God's project. And so if we think of our faith as something personal or individual, as an escape from the blood, sweat, and tears of this world, we are missing the point. What's coming is a whole new heaven and earth. It's Extreme Makeover, the Cosmos edition. It's a whole world born again. It's the renewal of all things. And that actually is one of the things that I like about Lakeview, is the mission statement here. Joining God in the renewal of all things. Because that reflects the large, inclusive, all-embracing vision of what God wants to do in us and in this world. Okay, so I hope you get the point. Let's move on. Throughout this chapter, throughout this description, and this is going to follow up in chapter 22 as well, but as we're seeing now, throughout this description of the beauty, the glories of the age to come, of the new creation, there are also descriptions of things that are left out, things that don't belong there. And together, these omissions create a pattern. It's not that God is picky or that he's angry and vindictive. It's that he's an artist. He's designing a masterpiece, and he knows what belongs in there for the best effect. It's like a chef who knows which flavors, which spices go in and which don't, because the goal is ultimate perfection. So here we see the first omission is the sea. The sea. Why would that be? Is it that John wants to get rid of the sea so that he can leave this island where he's in exile and walk back to the mainland? No. The sea represents something in biblical images. It represents the source of suffering, the source of evil. It's the source of chaos. The sea is unpredictable and dangerous. And to say that there is no more sea in this world recognizes that even at the most basic level of geography, of a sense of place, of belonging, that God's will not be interrupted, it will not be disturbed. There will be no alien forces to disrupt, to threaten, to overturn. It will be in harmony with God's plan. And I saw the holy city, the New Jerusalem, coming down from heaven from God, prepared like a bride, beautifully adorned for her groom. I don't know if any of you were here at the wedding that took place in this sanctuary yesterday. I've been at many weddings, and I know that there is very little in the human world as beautiful as seeing a bride meeting her groom on the wedding day. So here is something new in the story of retracing our steps back to Eden. There's something new as we compare it to Genesis, because the first paradise does not have a city. The city in Genesis only shows up in the sinful world. It shows up, it's first built by the first murderer. And then it's amplified with the Tower of Babel and as the expression of everything that is rebellious, that is prideful, that is deceitful and deceived in our human experience. But, and here is the good news of this verse: the city can be redeemed. The city can be redeemed and brought into God's good purposes. So we discover that there was a horrible city. There was, as Revelation says, a whore of a city. But we also see now that there is a holy city, the new and true Jerusalem. Not the conflicted Jerusalem that some of you may have visited or might want to visit yet. A city that is divided and broken and in so many places strangled with hate and fear, as I saw it myself 2 years ago. This is a new Jerusalem, a new city, and it's completely a gift from God. We can't build it because it comes from God. It's a gift. We can't improve it because it's as gorgeous as it can be. It's as gorgeous as that young bride standing at the end of the aisle, finally come of age, radiant inside and out, looking down the aisle at her beloved. This bride, this city, this home, this is the fulfillment of all human dreams of God with God's people. Are you in? And I heard a loud voice speaking from the throne. Watch this. God's tent is being set up among his people. He is tenting among them, and they will be his peoples, and God himself will be with them. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. Death will not exist anymore. There will be no more mourning or crying or pain, for the former things are gone. Here we learn three things about the holy city. First of all, it fulfills the plan that God has to take up residence with his people. A plan that we see, first of all, in the Exodus, in the Old Testament, with Moses, and that tent of meeting. And that's exactly the language that is being used here, the tent. The dwelling place of God is literally a tent in this chapter, because it points back to God meeting his people in the wilderness. And then that language of tenting is used again in one other place in the Bible, and that's in John chapter 1, where John says, "And the Word, that eternal Word that was with God in the beginning, that was God, is God, tented among us." That Word became flesh and tabernacled, tented, took up residence among us as God's glory in our midst. And we saw his glory full of grace and truth. That's Jesus. And now we see for eternity once again God taking up residence with his people. It's a wonderful thing. Secondly, this passage uses the language of treaty. It uses the language of covenant. That is something which is enduring, unbreakable. Let me put it into a bit more of a contemporary version, one that fits with what we're talking about, the bride, because that's exactly the kind of covenant language that we've got here. "By the authority vested in me," says God, "I pronounce us, God and people. What I have joined together, let no one put asunder." That's the language that we have here in this vision. It's the language of marriage covenant, of perpetual fidelity. That's what God is promising, and that is what is coming into existence as we see it in the city here. And finally, we see this city overturns the last enemy, the curse that has hounded us ever since we first rebelled against God. Death is the last enemy of the human race. And death has 1,000 smaller offspring that show up in our lives every day. The little deaths, the symbolic deaths, those ice-cold tendrils that wrap themselves around every part of our experience, the griefs, the sorrow, the loss, the pain, the sickness. In the age to come, in the holy city, death and all its offspring has no place. Our griefs and our cares, our sorrows and our worries, all of these come to the place where they will finally be treated by the great physician, where he will gently remove them, take them, and at the feet of Jesus, they will be done away with. Do you thirst for that? Are you in? And the one sitting upon the throne said, "Watch this. I am making all things new." And he said, "Write this down because these words are trustworthy and true. Take note." And he said to me, "It's all done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. To the thirsty, I myself will give freely of the fountain of the water of life. The one who conquers will inherit all this, and I will be their God, and they will be my children." Here at the end of all things, two promises show up. The first one is a promise for the thirsty. Are you thirsty? For me, that's a word that I use regularly to describe my spiritual life. It's not the only word, but it certainly is a useful word. I thirst. I thirst for God, for His presence, for His work in my life. And so I find it encouraging to think that even here, even at the end of all things, it's okay if we're thirsty because God is there with the water of life. There's a second promise. There's a promise for the conqueror. And this seems, as I read it, this seems to be a different kind of person, right? This is for the super spiritual, the super Christian. Or is it? Because when I listen to what John writes in 1 John chapter 5, I get something a bit different. And this gives me a bit more hope because I don't feel like that super Christian. This is what John says in 1 John 5. "Everyone born of God conquers the world. This is the victory that conquers the world, our trust, our faith." Who is it that conquers the world? Only the one who trusts that Jesus is the Son of God. No super spirituality needed. No heroic acts are necessary. Just an abiding trust in Jesus as God's Son. And we end up being daughters and sons of God. We end up being heirs of God in all of this, in this new creation. Okay, as we move on, this is where things get a little bit more harsh. But regarding the cowardly, the faithless, those who do what is disgusting, the murderers and sexually immoral, those who practice occult magic, the idolaters, and all deceitful people, what they get is the fiery, flaming lake. This is the second death. And this is where I start to tremble. I don't like talking about judgment. And I don't know how anybody can contemplate a verse like this, contemplate this verse, without being tested and pushed to the core of their being, core of their faith. All of us have people that we know, loved ones, family, friends, who we know are not living for the Lord. What do we do? What do we do with verses like this? People tossed into the flames? Even as an image, even as a symbol, what do we do with it? How do we wrestle with this? Do we see this as some divine Santa's list showing who's naughty and who's nice. Except that here, the naughty are given a whole lot more coal to burn than Santa ever gave. So I want to just unpack this a little bit, pull apart a little bit. What actually do we have to think about as we read a verse like this? First of all, it's clear that there are things that do not belong in the new creation. It's just like the sea and just like death itself, there are things that contradict God's plan, things that are out of harmony with the new creation. They belong on an exclusion list. So there is judgment. But then I need to ask, what makes a coward? Is it one cowardly act? Or 5 or 10? Is it one cowardly thought? Or 5 or 10? At what point does an action or a thought become an identity, become what we are? There's certainly not much leeway with that sort of thing if you're an aspiring politician. If you see one wrong move, and you're off the list. And I mean, there's 4 now that have dropped as of last time I checked before church started in our provincial election. What if we were all subjected to that kind of scrutiny? One bad email, one blog post, Facebook post, or one thought, because really, I mean, this is God we're dealing with, right? And he doesn't need to see it written out on Facebook, it's in our thought. So it is one angry thought, one cowardly thought. Are we now a coward? And are we labeled with that for life? If that's what we're up against, I'm afraid we're all going to fry. Again, what makes a murderer? Is it killing one person? Well, that should do it. But hold on, what does Jesus say? If you've been angry in your heart, you've killed him. You're a murderer. He's a lot more nuanced this way. So in Jesus' estimation, we're all murderers and adulterers, right? Well, yes and no. We are all people who are guilty of murder, all people guilty of sexual immorality and other sins. But the question is, how are we defined? Are we defined by that sinful activity, or are we defined by the renewing, forgiving grace of God? Because the Bible also suggests that not all who murder are murderers. Ask Moses. Ask King David. Ask St. Paul. All of them were guilty of murder. But I'm reasonably certain that none of them will be considered murderers according to this verse. So, I suggest that the point of this verse is not simply who's in and who's out for eternity, but it's what needs to be purged from my heart, from our lives, in this world. So I'm not trying to drain the terror out of this verse, but I'm trying to redirect it at how serious these things are in our lives right now. Because it's about us, just as it was about John's original audience. It's a warning. Don't give in to the empire's pressure tactics. Don't be cowardly. Don't give up the faith. Don't go back to your pagan practices. So, we are warned sternly, strongly against these sins because they have no place in the holy city. They belong to the realm of death, and let's leave them there. So, do these have any hold in our lives? Anger, lust, and that can be lust of somebody on the street or somebody on the screen. Do we try to manipulate people to get our own way, whether that's through hidden agendas or hidden occult arts? Do we put ourselves ahead of God anywhere in our life and become idolaters? Our choices and our actions, they matter. They will be judged. But there is also this. God is infinitely more qualified than Santa to figure out in eternal terms who is naughty and who is nice, who's in and out, and we can trust his judgment. Now, one of the 7 angels came and spoke with me. Come here, I will show you the bride, the wife of the Lamb. And he carried me away in the Spirit to a mountain great and high, and showed me the holy city, Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God. It shone with the very glory of God, and its brilliance was like that of a very precious jewel, like a jasper, clear as crystal. It had a great high wall with 12 gates, and with 12 angels at the gates, and on the gates were written the names of the 12 tribes of Israel. There were 3 gates on the east, 3 gates on the north, 3 on the south, and 3 on the west. The wall of the city had 12 foundations, and on them were the names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb. Okay, so we're called up to meet a bride, and hey, it's a city. That's weird, but it's Revelation, okay? We've seen this sort of thing before. We're called to see a lion, and whoa, it's a lamb. So we're catching on to that, right? So first of all, again, we catch the imagery of light. This is a place of splendor and beauty, and light is such a basic symbol, hardly needs explaining. It hardly needs explaining. Just, spend a week in clouds and fog and rain in British Columbia, and then that's where I grew up, I can say that. And then the sun comes out, and that light has such power to cheer the spirits, to bring forth life. It's just beautiful. But more specifically, what this passage is communicating, and that's a bit more weird for us, is gates, lots of them, and they've got names. They are named after the tribes of Israel. So this leads to a bit of a tricky construction question, because we've got the gates, which are the tribes of Israel. So that's Old Testament, right? And down below, the foundation, well, those are the apostles. That's New Testament. That's the time of Jesus. So I'm not big into construction. I haven't done a lot of that kind of work, but I do know this. I do know that you have to lay a foundation before you can put the walls up, right? You build the walls and then try and dig foundations underneath. I don't think that normally is how, I know that's not how you normally do it. Don't know if it's possible. But here, we've got something upside down, right? Because it's the apostles, it's New Testament, it's the people around Jesus that saw Jesus and spoke of him, experienced his power and his presence and his healing. That's where the foundation is. Everything else is built on that. Even the Old Testament, even though it looks like in time, in our human experience and history, as though that came first, but Jesus is foundational. There is one story in this world, and it's the story of Jesus. Everything, the Bible, the New Jerusalem, our lives right now, and eternity with God, all of that is built around this one story. So, do you know that story? Are you in? The angel who talked with me had a measuring rod of gold to measure the city, its gates, and its walls. The city was laid out like a square, as long as it was wide. He measured the city with the rod and found it to be 12,000 stadia in length, and as wide and high as it is long. Okay, it's kind of strange, but the last time I preached, I also had some verses that talked about a city and its dimensions. I don't know if you were here, you might remember that, but that was Nineveh, this tiny little city. It's basically from here to Preston Crossing, a 2-hour walk. And in the ancient world, that was called the Great City, Nineveh. Here, we've got something which is so much bigger. The dimensions are mind-blowing. It's square. Square talks about balance, symmetry. If you've ever thought your life is out of balance, well, you're probably like 99.9% of the population. In the age to come, God is giving balance. Where we live, everything will be balanced. But yeah, so it's square, but then in the vision, all of a sudden, it's not just square, but it goes 3-dimensional. It's a cube. What's up with that? Well, there's one other important cube that shows up in the Bible. And again, that's in the architecture of the temple. It's the holy place, the most holy place. That was a small cube. It was narrow, 15 feet by 15 feet by 15 feet. And it was the place where God's presence was understood to reside on earth. It was a fearsome, fearful, awesome, awful place. Because if you go there in the wrong time, in the wrong way, you will die. One person, And only one person, the high priest, was ever allowed there, and that was only one day a year, on the Day of Atonement. So now we've got blown open wide. Holy of Holies becomes bigger than the whole Roman Empire. Okay, if you're still a literalist, let me show you what 12,000 stadia looks like. Okay, so it's this cube descending, well, it's coming on Western Canada. Let's say this is where we want it to come, but, is it going to come over Jerusalem? This is for the imagination, right? So it doesn't work that way. It's not just like Independence Day that just kind of settles down and terrifies people. No, it's symbolic. 12 means the people of God, all God's family. 1,000 means something that's almost an eternity, big enough for God himself to inhabit. So 12,000 by 12,000 by 12,000. To the symbolic mathematician, there is nothing more that speaks of how open and inclusive, how spacious God's grace is. The wall was 144 cubits thick. The wall was made of jasper, the city of pure gold, as pure as glass. The foundations of the city walls were decorated with every kind of precious stone: jasper, sapphire, agate, emerald, onyx, ruby, chrysolite, beryl, topaz, turquoise, jacinth, and amethyst. The 12 gates were 12 pearls, each gate made of a single pearl. The city's main street was paved with gold as pure as transparent glass. Okay, so what's up with this? Well, think of a bride on her day and just wearing all the precious, beautiful gems that she can find that exist. It's extravagance, it's opulence, it's celebration of beauty because, yes, it's a day to celebrate. But there's actually more going on here. These particular stones, these point to an Old Testament reality that, again, takes us back to the temple, because that high priest, when he enters in to the Holy of Holies, is wearing a special piece of regalia, a breastplate, which has these stones on them, with the names of the tribes carved on there. These are grace rocks. These are signs to the priest that the whole people needs the grace and forgiveness of God. And so he carries them in representatively. He brings them into the presence of God. But now, because we have such a high priest, Jesus, let us enter with confidence and come boldly before the throne of grace. We have a welcome that allows everyone to come in, that invites everyone in. The great priestly work of Jesus has been done. It is the foundation of our eternal home. And there's one last thing about these gems. Okay, we've got the 12 up here, but then there's the pearly gates. You know, that thing which, there's at least one comic strip every week that makes fun of the pearly gates. You've seen it. But the pearl is the one stone that's not like all the others. It comes from a living creature. And it comes, and this is the weirdest thing for where we are right now, it comes from the sea. In the ancient world, it was considered the most precious of gems because of that, because it was the hardest to get. They didn't have farmed pearls back then. And so it's harder than mining them. And there is no sea here. So there's a connection here. The sea, which represents the source of suffering and destruction in human life and on earth. And the most precious thing that comes out of the heart of the sea, out of the depths of that, is now the gate, the gateway that welcomes us in. If you think about it, the symbolism is profound. That which came out of the depths of human suffering, out of the worst that this world had to offer, that which we usually think of as the old rugged cross, that is the gateway, that precious pearl that comes from the depths to let us into the holy city. And I saw no temple in the city, for the Lord God Almighty is its temple, and so is the Lamb. The city has no need for the sun or moon to shine on it, for the glory of God gives it light, and the Lamb is its lamp. The nations shall walk in its light, and the kings of the earth will bring their glory into it. And its gates will never be shut by day, for there will be no night there. And the glory and tribute of the nations will be brought into it. There is something powerful about that final phrase, the glory and tribute of the nations. The age to come, the new creation, the holy city is rich and expansive. There is room there for everything from our human experience. What does that mean? What does that mean? Instead of all the cheap dollar store trinkets, the costume jewelry of the fake city of Babylon, instead of all the shoddy trinkets of mass production, instead of the cliched chord progressions and the tired lyrics of 1,001 forgettable tunes, instead of the watered-down Sunday school juice or the stale beer that tries to quench our thirst, it is going to be a never-ending banquet. New flavors every day. It's going to be a never-ending exploration. It's going to be a never-ending concert, the best of the best of the best. Craftsmanship and creativity and enduring value, and all of it will be worship, because we will be doing the things that God, our Creator, made us to do. Are you in? Are you in? And nothing impure will ever enter it, nor anyone who does what is disgusting or false, but only those whose names are written in the book of life. Now, I've often thought of the book of life as a list of names, the ones who are in, and you're kind of going through there and you're hoping that you're going to find it there. But the more I think about it, I'm not sure that it is. I mean, the Bible does, in its many pages, have these genealogies and these lists of names. But the Bible, far more so, has narrative. The Bible tells stories. And so I'm starting to think more of the book of life as a narrative, as a story. The story that is told for the refreshment of the Spirit. It's the one story, the grand story that ultimately will be told, where all the events of our lives, all the broken pieces, the dead ends, the stories of loss and confusion and hopelessness, where they finally will have a place and belong, where all the hidden things, the shame, the loss, the sorrow, the pain that make up this earthly journey are eventually revealed to be part of a grander theme, a more noble conflict, and a hope-filled conclusion. The Lamb's book of life is open and ready to become the story of your life and mine. So here, near the end of the book of Revelation, we stand on the verge. The story is almost done. This is what I hear. This is what I hear God saying to us this morning. Jesus is building his church, this church, Lakeview, and 1 million others like it. The gates of hell will not prevail, not now and not ever, not for eternity. It's a large church that Jesus is building. It's more like a temple. It's more like a city. It's a whole world. It's big enough for all who walk through its gates because God's grace is big enough. It's calling us home. So our King Jesus, is standing at the end of days. He's standing at the end of the aisle, a huge smile on his royal face. And he's looking down the aisle to us, to his bride, and he's ready to walk into our, so that we are ready to walk into his loving embrace. We will be with God face to face, no longer hidden, no longer shadowed by all the trials and pains of this present darkness. A light will be shining that makes everything more beautiful, more true, and more good. So Jesus is standing at the end of days, inviting us into this future. Are you in? Are you ready to join him in the renewal of all things? Let's pray. Jesus, we thank you that you are here, that you walk with us right now. And we thank you that you are standing at the end of days, that you are calling us forward and giving us courage and hope and even joy in the midst of the trials and the testing. Through your Spirit, Lord, give us strength to walk hour by hour and day by day. We so look forward to meeting you face to face. At the end of time, at the beginning of a greater story. We pray this, Jesus, in your name. Amen. Love God, love people, and tell his story.